welcome to the At Sea Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and for the time being, for the foreseeable future, I'm also my guest. We made a shift earlier this year, moving away from guest conversations, which have been tremendous and wonderful. We've had some really great folks here to talking. This podcast talks more directly with you about the things you're engaging. Originally, when we started the At Sea Podcast, the intent and the hope was to help you navigate the things you were seeing in life. The idea at sea was that we were all at sea in some way, shape, or form, and some of the waters we navigate culturally, institutionally, interpersonally, spiritually were turbulent. And so I wanted to do what I could by providing some voices who are also navigating those waters, so that we can move through life, not quite without turbulence, but to navigate the turbulence together. As time has gone on, it's become a bit of a connection point for me, that the direct conversations I have with you as a coach or even as a podcaster are just more life-giving and maybe more, at least for the time being, effective. So I've been taking questions from Instagram weekly, and then about life, about the way I'll say it is, ask me anything, religion or creativity or art or leadership, and then I do the best I can to text some answers back, to type some answers back on Instagram, and then take a few of those questions and bring them to the podcast. So we are currently working on a more creative way to harvest questions from elsewhere, so it's not just an Instagram thing, specifically for folks who are not as adept at or interested in social media spaces. But for the time being, that's where this is happening. So let's get into some of these questions. Some really, really, really fun ones. This is a question about stillness, and the question is finding stillness and moving through grief as a tired parent. What was that like for you? So finding stillness and moving through grief as a tired parent. I'm going to categorize this. I'm going to go to like 40,000 feet and talk about self-care, caring for oneself as a parent or as a new parent. The first piece I get into here is that it's important for us to think of life in seasons, and there are seasons in which we don't get all the things we want or need, even for ourselves. So I talk about balance a bunch in this context. Part of why the balance narrative is so dangerous is because in a season like early parenting, I can, if I believe that my life is supposed to be balanced and that all things are supposed to be happening at all times in equally well, if I believe that, then I get into parenting, and it's this season in which I have to devote all this time and energy, really more energy and time than I actually have, right? To caring for this kid and growing this, and I have to, all this energy has been redirected. And if I think I'm supposed to also be able to take care of myself and also get stillness and silence, and also have time to deal with grief issues and also get my work done, if I believe that, I'm going to end up living in resentment and frustration and anger. So especially as an early parent, this is maybe counterintuitive, certainly counterculture for the moment. Dealing with grief, my own personal grief, might take a backseat for a while. Dealing directly with the grief doesn't have to happen right away. Now, that's not to say I don't acknowledge it. It's not to say I bottle it up and don't do anything about it. But actually dealing with grief and getting into the nitty-gritty, depending on what it is that I'm grieving, it might take a backseat for a while. And or I need to become way more strategic and find I have to not just do it, how should I say this? Roughshod? That's not what I want, willy-nilly. In other words, if I'm going to deal with a grief, if I am grieving something, maybe it's the loss of what used to be before I had a kid, or maybe who knows what it is. Depending on the nature of the grief, if I really want to get into that, I have to make some really specific time. So I've got to put that on the calendar for sure. But the biggest part of this is there are things that are true of us, injuries, our well-being, that in certain seasons actually do take a back seat. You can feel me pushing back really hard against the notion that I get to do all things well at all times, even if taking care of myself is one of those things. We live in a culture cultural moment here in the West in which if you're feeling a thing and experiencing a thing specifically that's a negative, if it's a past injury, if it's a triggering thing, if it's a grief, that takes precedence over everything else. I'm saying no. Actually, it is not the case. Sometimes, yes, if it's a debilitating grief and you cannot parent, then let's get into that for sure. But if it's a grief, if it's not that, then there's going to be a season in which me taking care of me takes a bit of a backseat, and that includes rest and stillness. All that's to say, well, in light of that, let's say that and then set this off to the side. Things like stillness, things like quiet, they change. In other words, the way I used to get stillness and quiet before I had a child, it's different now. So for the part of the question was, how did it work for me? One was I just recognized I was not going to get rest the way I had been getting rest before. I wasn't going to find stillness the way I'd been getting stillness before. So I had to relearn and look for new ways to go about doing that. One of the things I learned to do, and this was me. This doesn't have to be everybody. But that moment, when it's 10 o'clock, 10:45, 11, and I'm the one in the baby's room, trying to put the baby down, trying to get the baby to go to sleep, and I wish I was asleep. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I wish I was asleep. Can I receive the gift of the moment, not just that I get to be a parent, which is a gift in and of itself, but the fact that this is the only place I can be. Stillness is not necessarily the absence of other things. Stillness oftentimes has more to do with being able to be fully present where I am. And one of the challenging invitations of being a parent of a newborn child is that really is the only place I can be, especially if it's, like I said, 11:01 and the kid's screaming and tired. And what if there's an invitation there? And part of that invitation, this happens in other places in life, that invitation is to just be that one place. So, complex answer with, I'm going to assume, what would be a lot of pushback. There are seasons in life in which taking care of myself takes a backseat. It's one of the decisions I make when I decide I'm going to have a child. I did not see it coming, and I did not hear the stories. So I can't say like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? I know how it happened. This is not a season in which me taking care of myself takes precedence. And secondly, where I do get stillness, where I do take care of myself with regards to the grief, it changes. And those spaces get smaller. I've got to be more strategic, and I've got to be better planned, and I've got to get more creative and more inventive about where I receive those invitations. I'm kidding. I have no idea. I mean, I do, but it's not from Marion, Ontario. I think I've always wanted to say that. And the question is, I'm thinking about moving from loneliness, or the movement from loneliness to solitude. What does that look like practically? And this is one of those questions that begs a bit of a, like it takes me in a different direction than just answering the question, because there isn't a movement from loneliness to solitude. Solitude and loneliness are very different things. Loneliness, and this is the way I wrote it here, is solitude and loneliness are two very different experiences. Loneliness is emotional information about our desire to be with other people. Solitude is an emotional posture that allows me to be with other people without needing them. So loneliness is a qualitative negative. It's not good. It is not good for a man to be alone. This is very, very early on in the creation story. It's not good. Loneliness is an experience we have, and it's an experience we're sharing right now culturally, for which solitude ends up, by the way, being a little bit of a, I don't want to call it like a remedy, but certainly part of the healing process. So let's talk. I want to talk about the relationship between loneliness and solitude. There isn't a movement from one to the other. Loneliness is it's a symptom. It's emotional data. Loneliness is my soul saying, I miss people, and usually that comes with specifics. Usually there's specific names. Like there's a group of persons. There's an institutional group of persons. But it's a way for my soul. Loneliness is a name I give the pointed absence of the presence of other persons, and the cultural moment we're in now it exacerbates our loneliness by selling us a false sense of connectedness. This is part of why I think this comes up. We're experiencing this shared moment of loneliness, which is one of the ironies of loneliness, is it's such a common experience that we're all kind of in it together. But the false sense of connection that social media channels or the television sells us on actually leaves us feeling like it exhausts us of our social and emotional energies, so that we actually don't have as much energy as we should have or want to have for actual interaction. Also, it presents oftentimes social media connections or movie connections or TV connections present us with this false sense of what a community or what a relationship actually looks like. So that I have false expectations with which I go into actual social connected places, and then I'm disappointed because it doesn't look or feel like that. Loneliness is information that our souls give us about the absence and the loss of other persons. Solitude ends up being a remedy for that up to a certain point. But here's the remedy. Solitude is a posture in my soul, a posture in me, in which I'm okay with myself. Solitude is the practice of becoming okay, like in myself, so that I'm okay being alone. Not so that I'm okay being lonely, because I do want other people, but solitude is the practice of being okay in and of myself in relationship with the divine. I'm good being by myself. I'm good in myself. I know myself, my highs, my lows. I'm aware of myself. And what that does is that it makes me less dependent upon other people around me for things that I need to be dependent upon God for, or dependent even on my own soul for. There are forgivenesses and graces and mercies I need to offer myself, and I need to receive from the divine about my shortcomings that I will try to get from other people. There are emotional provisions that I need to receive from the divine or receive in and of myself that I try to seek out from other people. If I can receive the mercies, the graces, and the forgivenesses available to me in solitude, that frees me up to be available to and for the people around me in a way that actually, those relationships become more healing and more whole. Part of why we're lonely the way we're lonely is because we have a false set of expectations for what community and relationship looks like. That's part of what social media platforms and other things have sold on us. Solitude is a remedy from all the garbage that we've been sold, almost all the garbage we've been sold from social media channels, etc., so that we can actually re-engage in community and in relationship in a healthier, wholer way. That's, for me, the actual connection between loneliness and solitude. There's no movement from loneliness to solitude, but solitude becomes a way to rescue us in the long run from the sickness that is loneliness. This last question, it's a leadership question, and I like these questions because it puts me in a position of self-reflection. What is the biggest lesson you've learned about leadership as your faith has evolved? Such a great question, specifically because it's posited with the sort of evolution of my faith. Like, what do I know now that I didn't know before? As my faith has evolved, one way to talk about this is as my faith has evolved and deepened, I really do trust God more. And because I trust God more, I feel less responsible. I listened to a really great podcast by John Ortberg and Nancy Ortberg, and I can't remember the third gentleman's name, about the nature of leadership, spiritual formation and leadership. And in the podcast, this phrase gets floated about a few times, that I'm not designed to bear my soul is not designed to bear the weight of outcomes. In other words, earlier in my life in leadership and spiritual leadership and otherwise, I would want a particular outcome for someone else, and it'd be like a good desire. Like, I would want this to be true for you. I would want you to have this success. I would want you to achieve this internally or externally. All that's good. But then, because I was immature in my faith, I felt responsible for that, and that if things didn't happen the way we had planned, or these outcomes we didn't get there, I would wear that, and I would bear the responsibility for that. And that wore me down over time. So I've learned that, Paul writes this in one of his letters. He says, you plant and, I plant and someone else waters, but God makes it grow. I think it's in Apollos. I can't remember the name. But like we can plant, we can water, but God makes things grow. So I can, with regards to like spiritual formation or any kind of leadership, ultimately it's this. I can model and I can invite. But ultimately, with regards to your success and failure in work or your growth in your own spiritual formation, it's rooted in your own desire. This is the biggest lesson I've learned, is that I can, I said, a person's development and growth and success have more to do with their desire than my ability to lead. It frees me up to offer the best of what I have, because I'm not afraid that if I do it and then it fails, I'm going to question my own worth. Like, I can give the best I have. This is the best I have. And then really, even if that's not enough for you, like your development, your growth, your success is really a question of like your desire and your pursuit of whatever you're pursuing and your connection with God. I can help-ish, I can model, I can invite, but leadership-wise, the biggest lesson I've learned is that like your growth and your development, that's rooted in your desire, and it's not rooted in my ability to lead. It lets you have your victories, and I don't have to claim a victory even if I've helped you, and it frees me to be more completely just myself in myself, and then offer the best of myself in freedom. Well, thank you for joining me on this episode of the At Sea Podcast. Those are 3 of the questions picked up from Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram yet, it's just my name, at justinmcroberts.com, or at justinmcroberts, no.com. And if you're one of the folks who are supporting this podcast, thank you really specifically for this season, and for supporting this season this way. If you're not supporting the podcast and you want to be part of the team of people who are, go to patreon.com/Justin McRoberts, and we'd love to have you on the team. All right, until next time.